first of all, just starting, I thought this was great. The episode was fantastic, and I mean, I was a bit nervous about watching you because I thought this guy is very scary. I don't know how I feel about him. But going all the way back to the beginning, how did your journey into the film industry begin, and at what point did you realize I could make a living out of this?
Which is funny because that started in I was in Stirling University studying marine biology, and I'd always liked acting and stuff like that. And I actually left Stirling University marine biology to be a part of the Edinburgh Fringe Festival, which is a big for anybody that knows sort of theatre or stuff like that. For Edinburgh Fringe is a big thing to do a play. And I had always been sort of dramatic and like sort of stuff like that, sort of my mother was an actress, my stepfather was in a band. I'd had sort of that background a little bit, but I was getting a proper job in quote marks, sort of for a while there. And then eventually I realized that just because I could do something didn't mean I sort of should do it. So I dropped out of marine biology to go back to London to go to drama school, and it all kind of began there 20 years ago. I'm afraid, Jenna, this is a long time ago.
You'd never think it, just like yesterday. And over the years, you've branched out into directing and producing. And as an actor, how does your experience as a performer influence the creative decisions that you make in these roles? And vice versa, if we flip that question, how does your experience as a director or producer impact how you would perform?
It's a good question. I think as you go, like anything, right? The more that you do it, the better you become at it. It's like riding a bike or any kind of muscle memory. You get kind of good at doing stuff as you get more experience doing it. You're not an expert guitar player on day one, but the more you do it, and the more you're think. But I always think of it a bit like an orchestra, a little bit. In order to be the conductor of an orchestra, you kind of have to know everything about all the instruments. Or the more that you know, the better your sort of understanding of it will, and the more you'll get out of people. So same with the director. A director should know everything about his departments. Like as in, it wouldn't have hurt any director at all to have done his time as a costume person, as a makeup person, as a a designer, as a DOP or a lighting, sort of, or any of these things, because they understand what their heads departments are doing. So that it's a whole team effort, right? Everything, and including that is I love a director that's done a bit of acting. To be honest, they have performed themselves, because usually then they're able to tell you something really cool, like they're able to tell you a piece of direction that's really, really helpful. Sort of rather than I'll give you an example. Somebody comes in and says, can you be more, in this scene you have to be angry, more angry. And you're like, okay, that's not a great piece of direction, because you're like, am I angry at somebody in the room? Am I angry about something that just happened? Am I, you can't just be angry. You have to be angry about something. But some inexperienced directors know they want you to be angry. They just they have a bad way of expressing it. Whereas a good director will kind of tell you, not only, he won't even say that you're angry. He'd be like, this guy just insulted you. He'd make you angry, sort of. That's how he'd give you direction to go into the next scene.
And when a role is pitched to you, or when you've read the script, at what point do you start to sort of get into the mindset and build up who this character is, build up their identity, and do you get into their headspace at all, or are you more, would you go on set and then that's when you think, right, we're going to focus on how my surroundings will impact this?
I think when you get these things, I mean, this was a real easy decision, sort of, do you want to be in a scene with Arnold Schwarzenegger? Sort of, so this was a real easy one for me, but you got to keep flexible, right? Sort of. So I always think you don't set too much in stone. You have to learn the dialogue. You have to like sort of practice lines. But obviously, when you come in to the scene, the other actor who's doing your scene with you, you're always usually doing it with somebody else or more than one person. They're always going to do something different than you thought. So you might be reading it, and whoever you're practicing with is reading it in one style, or they go, I'm going to read this line really angrily or something like that. But then when you sit in front of Arnold Schwarzenegger, he doesn't do it like that at all. He does it completely differently. So you have to be flexible up to the last minute. I'm a big love of theatre and improvising, sort of. So I kind of enjoy not knowing everything there, and I wouldn't describe myself as that sort of control freak actor. I do actually very much enjoy the last minute nature of stuff, and changing it at the last, bit. So I think you can't set too much in stone. You have to set a bit in stone, going, right, what do I sound like? For this show, I didn't speak like this character. These guys had me go to like voice dialects. I just auditioned and got the job in my British accent. And then they were like, oh, but we're going to get you to do it in in a Flemish accent, and I was like, I'm not even sure what that is, but I was like, yeah, okay. And but didn't seem too worried about it. So I was like, okay, yeah. And so they kind of, they leave a lot to that to you, and then you arrive on the day, and there's lots of time. This is one good thing about this show is it has plenty of time and plenty of money.
And speaking about the sort of flexibility of the whole industry in general, how does your initial interpretation of your character change as you're filming, and how do you develop that from who they are on paper to who we see in the finished product?
Yeah, good question. With all these things, you got to try and make people three-dimensional, right? Sort of. So there's no just bad guys in movies, which of course this guy is just a bad guy, sort of my character in this Yui. But you have to make him sort of a little bit more three-dimensional. Often the way I like to do it is add a bit of humor to it. Like he finds joy in what he's doing, even though you're like, oh, but he's just a bad guy. So, well, bad guys still find things funny, still finds they have a little bit of weakness, sort of at the beginning of this thing is the guy he enjoys his food and stuff like that, sort of and you get a sense of these things, and it's a little weird at first, but it can help, sort of form up your mind about what you're doing.
And you mentioned that you do an accent in the show, and you were great at it. I thought it was fantastic. And
Thank you.
I imagine for a lot of people that is quite challenging, having to, do an accent or completely change who you are. And has there ever been a moment in your career where you've maybe hesitated over what you've been asked to do, and because you're maybe a bit unsure of how it's going to look or sound, and how have you overcome that?
Yeah, no, great question there. I think the times of like just doing what you're told are definitely gone. Like, that's not something I like to do, to be honest. I like to own what I'm doing. It's so much so that I would like to improvise in scenes, a lot. So if I could possibly improvise, I try to. But that means that I'm comfortable with everything else. Like, so, like as you say, how it looks and how it sounds. So when you're doing this sort of thing, it's difficult to improvise, obviously, in an accent it's not your own, sure. So you have to kind of try and work out that a little bit. But I think you should be definitely comfortable with what's happening, because if you're not comfortable, the camera kind of sees it. Because if you're there sitting thinking, I'm not sure about this, then when you start acting, I think people can see that you're not sure about it. Like, sort of, even if you're saying it exactly as you're supposed to say it, they're like, oh, there's something he's not convincing, or he's not saying it with conviction, or I don't know, but they feel that. So if you can iron that out with the director or the writer, or both, or whatever, and say, this sounds, ask questions and stuff like that. Any director worth his weight will not be rocked by your questions. And if you have, I used to have a rule with a couple of directors. If I'd come in and say something, I'm like, I don't think that he would do this, or he would, I think he would say something more like this. The director should be able to convince me that he's right, and if he convinces me he's right, then I'll totally do it, sort of. But if I convince him that I've got a good point, then he should change something to make that right, because that's how that makes it still a collaborative process. And every time I've done that with a director, you're having a fight over whatever you think, sort of. But any good director is able to concede if they're, or say, no, Simon, but let me tell you why I need it like this because of this, sort of. And you're like, okay, I get it, sort of. And they kind of able to justify the decisions. But I think you should take ownership, like creative ownership over it. Sure.
And throughout your career, you've played a lot of villains. Like, does it get, when you get a script, do you kind of think he's gonna be evil, he's gonna be absolutely diabolical, beyond this world, redeemable? And
yeah.
What is it about those characters that are so appealing to the audience to watch, and what is it that makes us kind of root for them in a way?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So villains all day long, right? The challenge is making a villain likable, but I think you're halfway there with villains. But I'll tell you why, because all people in the world are villains a little bit. Sort of the problem, I can never relate to Captain America, the good looking, but the true blue hero. Like, his heart is so pure, sort of the Superman of the world. It's difficult with Superman, like, because you're like, I like Batman. Batman's flawed. He's human. He's not perfect. He's too violent sometimes. He's a good hero because he's a little bit of a villain. And a lot of villains, don't think of themselves as villains. And that's always the way I try and approach these things. It's like, well, they're not villains. They're just usually trying to take care of their family. Take care, they have good, just like the best, like the Godfathers and stuff like that. They don't see it as like being a villain. They're saying, this is what I've got to do to survive. So they always have a way to justify it. So because nobody's inherently evil, sort of, but they all have we all do bad things in the name of a good reason, So you just got to think like that, and that gives you the spin of the character. I think as long as you know what that information is, it doesn't have to be in the script. You have to kind of know it, and it informs colors what you say. So.
And we've of course seen that sort of implemented through your co-star Arnold Schwarzenegger's career as well with Terminator, and you're kind of collecting 80s stars like it's a hobby of yours. You've worked with obviously Schwarzenegger, Bruce Willis, Jean-Claude Van Damme, and I imagine you grew up
Right.
watching them on screen. And is there anything that you've learned from working with them that you would apply to how you now would approach your roles?
Yes, I am collecting these guys. By the way, someone's just pointed that out to me. Like, somebody needs to get me Sylvester Stallone on the phone. I don't know. I don't get what he's doing, but Rocky. I need. If I can find Rocky Balboa, the set is complete because I'm an '80s baby. So yeah, for sure. I don't know. By the time when I was a young boy and I just started in drama school and stuff like that, I would look up to these guys greatly. I never in my wildest dreams thought I'd ever be doing stuff with them. I actually didn't. Like when I was doing Edinburgh Fringe Fair, I never thought that I'd end up here. But life is pretty wonderful like that. Sometimes it surprises you. I don't know if I'll be straight with you. I don't know if I've actually ever learned anything from any of them. I've just really enjoyed my experience with them because by the time I was sort of, not sort of, it sounds a bit sort of self-inflated, but by the time I was experienced enough to get a job with them, I'd been doing it for 15 years. Your kind of your own shtick and your own routine. At that point, you go, this is how I do things. I improvise, and I'm kind of comfortable in my own skin. This is how I kind of do things, and it's kind of works for me this far. That's how I get there. So by the time I'm face to face with these guys, I'm not really influenced by what they're doing. I'm just in awe of who they are, and I count myself as very privileged to sit across the table from Arnold Schwarzenegger on this one, and so on and so forth.
And would you say that you're making the movies that you wanted to make? As a child watching them, how does that feel looking back?
Yeah, I mean, like, so much so, that I wouldn't have even realized that this was a possibility. Sort of. I definitely when I graduated drama school, like 20 years ago, I would never have thought. I was like, when I'm going to do movies with Bruce Willis and Arnold Schwarzenegger and Jean-Claude Van Damme, it never would have occurred to me. Like, that was even a possibility. But obviously, if it did, I would have, yes, I would have loved it. I mean, I grew up with these things. These guys weren't actors to me. They were just, they were the Terminator, or they were, John McClane or something like that. They weren't. They were sort of on another level. Nowadays, we're just, they don't make these guys anymore. They don't make Schwarzeneggers anymore. They don't make Bruce Willis's anymore. There's not the next generation of that. I'm not in that next generation at all, and I don't think anybody around me is. I was like, these guys are like, they're sort of encapsulated in sort of an 80s, 90s sort of pop culture time capsule. They kind of keep getting older and stuff. And that's why people love them, because they keep doing it. And you're like, yeah, absolutely. Like, why not? Because they're not making any new ones. These guys are all going to eventually, get too old and die, and they'll be legends in their right. I mean, they're legends now, sort of. So we should soak them up as much as possible.
Well, I will say that you and Arnold Schwarzenegger both have something pretty big in common, and that's that you are both a part of two very iconic Christmas films, with you in Once Upon a Time at Christmas and, of course, Jingle All the Way, which is a classic.
Well,
Won't hear
we had
anything
so much to
different.
talk about on set, Jenna.
It's just coming in. And I have to ask, can we get a crossover with those two movies? Whether you want to be bitter rivals or teaming up, I think we should bring it back.
I think there's definitely mileage for a third movie there somewhere, but in between us both, yeah. I don't know if he'll take my call if I do that, because Arnold didn't give me his number. Yeah, I asked like 4 times. No, but that is a pitch and a half. I'm going to take that to Netflix myself.
Well, thank you very much for speaking with me today. It's been an absolute pleasure getting to chat with you. It's been maybe one of the funniest interviews I've ever gotten the pleasure of doing.
Thank you, Jenna. Good talking to you.